Jon Speelman with a video version of Agony 120, my 120th Agony column, and so the first factorial for a while, if you're a mathematician. The person who sent me games today, the guy who sent me games today, is a guy called Tim Gluckman, who is in his early 70s and plays chess for Lewisham Chess Club in southeast London. He sent me two very interesting games from Division 3 of the London League, and also a couple of really nice puzzles, which he'd actually used. He'd given some lectures, and one of these had been inside the ISIS prison in South London, near where he lives, near, I think, to Belmarsh, did he say. And he'd showed this to some inmates who he said were very interested, some prison. Right, so I'm going to start with his Agony, which is against some guy called I think he's actually Sadmaratov rather than Sadmaratov. I think I've managed to add an I. And what I said was, I normally analyse with an engine on just because I'm lazy and because it's easier and because you do get better analysis. But I happened to start this one without the engine, and so I carried on without the engine in a first pass, and then I put the engine on and saw what it had to say, how well I'd done. And what I would say is that because it was analysing rather than playing, I wasn't at 100%, I don't think. All my diodes or whatever I have in my head weren't really working. So it was a reasonable pass, but it wasn't great. And then later, and I missed some things I would have seen if I'd been playing in the game. So it's a modern defence. He's black. I don't know why he went d6 before bishop g7. This is one of the ways you can play. And the guy went, and he went d5, which Tim went d5, which is okay. I mean, you don't have to do that. You can just get your pieces out in some way. Now we've got something like a Rubinstein French now, but it's not a terribly good version. I mean, white's got a million pieces developed, and black's, well, 4 minor pieces, and black's got 2. He went knight d7. I haven't thought about that, actually. I don't know if knight c6 would be better. I mean, you'd like to get in c5. You're a bit worried about bishop g5, actually, and knight f6 check. So the whole position is a little bit dangerous. If you go knight f5, bishop g5, f6, bishop c1, you haven't achieved anything, because the d-pawn doesn't hang because of bishop b5 check. So if knight takes, queen takes, bishop b5 check. g4 is a bit unnecessary. I mean, he could just have gone queen e2 or something. Had a very reasonable game. I thought he might try this. That's the most dangerous, obviously. And I mean, knight takes knight, pawn takes bishop doesn't greatly help white, so you do this probably. And I didn't think of this. The engine said, why don't you try this? I was looking at this position. I was looking as black, actually, and thinking, sorry, Control F here. I was looking as black and thinking, well, I play these positions, but this doesn't look like a great version. Maybe I could play knight to d5 to f4 to try to blunt everything. And I wasn't very happy, but the engine said, what about knight takes knight, bishop takes knight here, if pawn takes pawn, f5, which is extremely aggressive, and not stupid, I think, either. And this is a line that the engine gave. I don't know if you need to go pawn takes bishop yet. And obviously white has pretty good compensation for the material. He's a slight amount of material down, but he's going to castle queenside, and it's going to be a total mess. Who knows? I haven't thought about it, really. What he did was he played e5, which is not a bad idea, I suppose. It frees black, but I don't know if white should take. I haven't thought about that, actually, either. What happened was that white went bishop h6. I wanted to go c3 here, but actually the best move, I think, bishop h6 is okay. If bishop takes b2, c3 is really unpleasant, because knight d5 you have queen e2, attacking the bishop and also threatening the crude but effective knight f6 double check, checkmate. And black's lost. That's completely lost in this position, actually. He played bishop e6, Tim, and f4 got played. I suppose we should stay with Tim. f4 is a bad move. I mean, I was thinking about c3, but actually the best move I think is queen e2. And that was the engine's move. And of course, again, if takes c3 and you've got your double threat, that's the end of the game. So you can't do that. And basically you're going to play knight d5, castles, queen d7. It gets very complicated. The engine gives some completely insane line that goes as follow. Oh, that I think is this just good for white? Wait a minute. Its main line goes queen e7, which I'm going to promote actually while we're here. And this is unclear. Now, I mean, I think I'd try to do something with the D-line in the game, but actually this is not bad either. And so, if we do a body count at this point, I know it's a quick line, it is a computer line. It's not a line I'd come up with without a lot of thought. Black has 3 pawns for the piece, but white has control of a lot of black squares. I really don't know what's going on here. I'm not sure if you should maybe even take and play rook d8 and try to swap the rooks off. White would get his king into the middle, but you could put your king in e6 and play f6, maybe c6 and b6, and don't know. Really hard to tell. I'm not sure if you want the rooks on or not in this position as black. You certainly don't have to take them off if you don't want to. You could also play takes rook e8, for instance. So I think this is unclear. I agree with the great and glorious engine. I mean, it's not very relevant to the game, of course. Let's go back to the game where he took a pawn. f4 I think was a little bit much actually. I mean, you do wonder as black, can you play some move like knight f5, but presumably bishop g5 would refute that. c3. If rook b1 you have to go queen d4. And I looked at this first. I was looking as white and thinking, surely there's some way to do something unpleasant, but actually there isn't. It just doesn't work very well. If check, well, you can take first, you can go bishop b5 first, but I looked at this, so if queen takes, knight f6 is mate, which is very pretty, but even c6 is okay here, c3, and basically it isn't working. Knight d6, no, this one doesn't work, does it, because of knight d6 to c4. This is catastrophe total, so that's complete nonsense, because knight to here, check, promote variation, king d7, knight c4 resigns. So that is not possible, but you go knight c6 in fact. Take, and basically, probably you take, and basically this isn't working for white. White's got a glorious position, but he's the exchange down. If you could play f4 to f2 and g4 to g2 and just castle, then maybe you could play this position, though rook d8 looks reasonable. One annoyance is that if bishop f6, black can still castle, I believe. And so it really is going to be very difficult. And by the way, queen b4 check is a threat as well. So the whole thing just doesn't work, unfortunately. Of course you play knight c6. Let's promote variation. What I am going to do is, after doing this, I'm going to resend the PGN to editor@chessbase.com so that he has a more sensible version. c3 was played and knight d5 was played. And as I said, I kept on trying to find good things to do for white, but it wasn't that clear. And he went bishop g7. Again, bits of it I thought about, bits I haven't. Nothing now works for white, as I realised as I looked for ways to hack through on the black squares. He went here, in fact. This is all good for black. And white's got a check if he wants, but it's not going to be much of a check. And black is coming in the strongest possible way around the back. So, I mean, knight c5, there would be queen f2 check. I'm losing my mouse, which is annoying. My mouse has been behaving badly recently. I may actually have to go into a desktop to get my mouse. I'm sorry, I'm going to go into my desktop for a second. recapture my mouse. Whoa. Bloody thing. Okay, let's go back. I'm sorry about that. Here's my mouse now. If knight c5, queen f2 check, and obviously checkmate is going to follow in the strongest possible terms. Bishop e2. Thinking about this. Or you can play knight b6 check and take the knight if you want to. Anyway, it's complete disaster. You want bishop d4, knight b6, protecting himself. Rook b1, rook takes is a good move, getting rid of an important bishop. Pawn takes, bishop takes, and basically black now is exchanged down, but white's king is awful, and black's king isn't too bad, so it should be winning for black. Played some more moves. That's a good move. Good move. White is at least teed up to play something like knight c5 and to take on b7. This is a blunder. Black should go queen b4 and rook d1 check, which is a really big check, and splat. And basically there's nothing to do here, I think. I don't know if you could try rook c1 instead. That looks still, the rook c1 looks slightly less awful, doesn't it? But probably, I haven't thought about this. Funny thing is you annotate a game and you're not that sure what's going on actually, it's just normal. But now we can go queen c3 check if we want to, as I've just noticed. And king d1, presumably anything will win. So if we have king here, you can go check here, check. Pawn takes gets mated, king takes, queen to there mate, and king d3 or king d2, something appalling. So that was winning, but queen a3 was a mistake, unfortunately. And bloody mouse again. It's been misbehaving itself. I don't know why. Sorry, this is really, you don't need to see the inner workings of my brain, do you? You want queen a3, which is a mistake, king b1, queen e7, rook takes knight. And interestingly, this position is still a draw after bishop takes bishop c6. What actually happened was bishop takes check here, here. And unfortunately, Tim had made the last blunder and he resigned here. Didn't need to resign here, and he could have played king c8 and said, well, how are you going to win? But obviously he is going to lose. I mean, you could play queen a8 check and rook d1 check if you wanted. Swap some pieces and you're going to be a material ahead. Interestingly, bishop here does actually draw, though the lines, it's a good move after this and here. And the engine tells me that this is still a draw, though there are a lot of checks. I suppose rook d1 is going to pin the bishop. Obviously this isn't my line, this is an engine line. So that was the first one. And we go on to the next one, which is down. I've deliberately put this here. The second game is another nice game with Tim Black, and he plays a very macho opening. Well, this is a Michael Basman type opening, and my sort of thing. And he plays the magnificent g5. I don't believe this is the best move on the board. It obviously isn't actually, but I mean, it's still fun. A lot of fun and respect. d4, g4, and maybe you could go h6 as well, just to keep the tension. Now you should go h3 here, I think, to break these pawns up. h3 was my first thought, and it's the right one, because if h5, you just win a pawn as white. You can't defend g4. And it ain't going to be good for black. If king f8, so that if queen takes g4, bishop d4, I think you just play c3. And you're going to win a pawn, and it's going to be very bad news. So after h3 you have to take it. And you probably just recapture, I mean, knight f4 maybe. And basically black's queenside is something of a mess. So in the long term, white should be better. Doesn't have to be a lot. I mean, you can play d5 or something. I'll play queen d3 to attack that pawn, then I will develop my pieces. And I will say, well, comrade, explain to me why you aren't somewhat worse. And I don't think that the said comrade is going to be able to explain to me why they aren't worse. So, E4 was played, H5, bishop B3. Now basically, in this position white's got, sorry I need an alt, white's got a weak squares here, and this is something of a target for a knight. And Tim understood this very well. I'm not sure about his moves. One thing he could have done actually is to change to the dark squares and do this. And put a knight on e5 in a moment. That's perfectly playable. It's an interesting way to play. I like that knight very much on e5. I don't understand why the Great and Glorious Engine doesn't think the black is at least okay here. I understand b6 is an ugly move, but I still don't care. In fact, it gave me plus equals when I asked it, but it didn't seem... Anyway, he played some moves. I thought a3 looked like a better move. Given that takes, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4 doesn't really work, which it doesn't, I don't think, then I would like to maybe do this. But in... Well, if you can go check actually at first as well, but you're going to go bishop g7, it's not going to be great, is it? White can play bishop or knight to e1 and get his pieces out, and presumably should be better. It's still complicated, but I think it should be better for white, unless black has some enormous hit instantly, and it's going to take a couple of moves to get a hit set up. You can try to go knight f6 and queen a8, or maybe queen a8 and f5 or something. It doesn't look that clear to me, but I think it should be okay for white. I'm going to check actually what the engine thinks. It likes this quite a lot. Oh, rook h6, which I didn't see. Actually, I mean, this is quite interesting, actually. I didn't see rook to h6 to d6. That's unpleasant. This is actually quite an unclear position, I think. I mean, queen a8, knight d2, f5 also sort of appeals to me a little bit. And I don't feel very comfortable, actually, as white. Though I think maybe white's better, but it could quite easily go wrong. Okay, I'm going to kill the engine. The engine's getting happier and happier for white. He actually went knight a3, knight f6, d5, fighting for the white squares, which g5, g4 has controlled. Knight to there, rook to there, queen to there. I think knight f4 is a great move. Excellent move. Black square bishops don't control white squares. And round about here it just went horribly wrong for white. Should have gone rook c1, I think. And it just, he blew up. Horrible mess it's going to be. If king f3, pawn takes pawn would check, king g2. Is that over or not? I can't see an immediate kill. I suppose you go rook takes rook, king takes rook, queen f1, followed by knight d3. That will be a kill, won't it? So we're saying that if king... King f3, pawn takes pawn, king g2, rook takes rook, king takes rook, queen f1, king to there, knight to here, and there are two threats, knight takes f2 and knight e1. It's clearly completely lost. Bishop h6 doesn't really help at all. Don't go king h7 because bishop f8 would at least be a nuisance. It would threaten mate. So just go here. No moves to create a threat. End of the world about to occur. Bishop f8 if you like. Very clever, trying to give some checks. Knight takes to there, resigns. So that was not nice. He went king e1 and he got splatted. Splat. And he resigned around about here, I think. So this was a very nice game by Tim. I mean, I'm not sure how I feel about... I mean, maybe g5's a playable move. It feels to me a little bit much like black is really taking on a bit much. Not sure d4 is a great move because it weakens e4. But I mean, you know, obviously white can't be worse at this moment. Probably bishop g7 is a mistake because you need to try to play h5 after Oh, I see, you can't anyway, can you? So you need to protect. And H3 would give some advantage. But, I mean, okay, it's a game in London League Division 3. It's a lovely game. Beautiful positional game on the white squares. Michael Basman would be delighted by it, and so is I. Well done, Tim. Tim also sent me these two problems, and I'm going to show you quickly. This is a problem by David Gergenidze and a collaborator. I'm not sure what the V stands for. And the idea is you go pawn equals knight, threatening knight d6 and knight b7. Black goes rook b1, rook g1, threatening rook g4 check. If you could play g4 to g3, you could go rook e1, knight d6, check, king h3, check, king g2 resigns. But you can't do that with a pawn. So we have a dance. I think rook d1 comes to exactly the same thing, or maybe rook e1, so that you've got squares. Maybe rook d1 there's going to be rook d6 check, but no, rook d6 check you can't take because it's stalemate. Anyway, there is a dance. I don't know if pawn equals rook also works, actually. It may do. But Upay has a queen, and we walk backwards. And finally the pawn goes from g4 to g3, which is beautiful. And mate next move. A very pretty study. And okay, there seem to be some duels, but it doesn't matter. That was one, and the other one was this mate in 8. So if you look at the white king and the white rook in this, you can see clearly that I think in problems you can castle as long as there's no indication that it's impossible, as long as you can't retroanalyze and prove that it isn't. So the solution is supposed to go castles queenside. Like that. That's what the solution is supposed to be, but in fact it turns out that unfortunately king d2 is also a duel. Rook e1 is actually the only move to work. If you take, we just go, if you go to king takes pawn, we just go rook e7, drive you to a3, then go king c2, king takes pawn. Or do we do it a move earlier? We go here, sorry, if takes, we go here, 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 as usual, here, here. Have I got this right? We've got 3 moves to do this, haven't we? So that would do, wouldn't it? 1 and 2 more moves. If king a4, we just go along here, and if king a2, we go along there. So this, unfortunately, is a cook, and it also turns out that after king c7, a7. No, you don't do it with the rook. You don't do it with the rook and f1 because it takes a move more. So king c7 is the best you can do, but it happens it's mate in few enough moves. So that was basically, it's a beautiful idea from the 19th century, and it doesn't quite work. And a Kuwaiti guy, who is it, whose name Badr al-Hajiri, decided that he would investigate whether you could make this sound with chess 960. So if we go to the initial position, for the chess 960 game, and the white king is in g1, then very long castles, which ends up with the normal castle position, if you know the casting rules in chess 960, is the only solution. And then he decided that he'd try to get a proof game of the chess 960 position, starting with the king in g1 and everything else more or less the same as in a normal starting position, kings in g1 and g8, and he produced a proof game with many much captures in a row at some point. So I recommend that if you like things like that, you go, it's all on Tim Krabbe's wonderful site, Chess Curiosities, and it's a lot of fun. So I hope you've enjoyed this very much, It was a pleasure doing it. I'm sorry about my bloody mouse. It's very badly behaved. I had a problem with the old mouse. I changed mice. I stuck on a Logitech mouse, which, you know, should have been quite splendiferous, but in fact didn't like my mouse pad at all. Stuck this mouse back in, and it is being bad-tempered, and I'm very cross with it. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. Please do send games, if you like, to me for the Agony column. I should say my email has now changed because of some license thing. My email is now jonathan@jspeelman.co.uk. Some punk had already signed up for speelman.co.uk, so I've had to put a J in front of it. So I am jonathan@jspeelman.co.uk. You can either send stuff to the Dropbox, which the address will appear at the end in the article, or you can send it direct to me. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this.